Plus, you're getting a new sister who you can build an even stronger relationship with. You need to move on because nothing will bring Lyra back." The words sliced through the cheerful clatter of my stepmom's birthday dinner. Outside, the world kept spinning. The cicadas kept their droning summer song. A car passed on the street. My little brothers were arguing over who got the last bread roll. But inside my head there was only a sudden, roaring silence. The fork in my hand, heavy with mashed potatoes, froze an inch from my lips. It was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging my entire consciousness into thick, slow-moving gelatin. I could see my stepmom, Coralie, smiling, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. I could see my dad, Marcus, nodding in agreement, his face a mask of weary relief. They thought this was a solution, a neat little patch for the gaping, sucking wound in our family. They were wrong. Coralie had no idea she wasn't just talking to a grieving daughter, she was talking to a living memory. She was talking to two people. And one of them was done being silent. For 364 days, I had been a ghost in my own home, a quiet echo of a person who used to live here. But in that single, cruel moment, the ghost began to scream. My name is Alara. I was 17 when I lost my other half, and this is the story of how a single dinner exposed the truth I had been forced to bury for a year. To understand why those words shattered a year of silence, you have to understand what came before them. You have to understand what it meant to be one half of a whole. You have to understand Lyra. For 17 years, my world had a built-in mirror. Not just in the physical sense, though we had the same dark, wavy hair that we both insisted on parting on the right, the same constellation of freckles across our noses, the same eyes so dark they were almost black. The real mirror was something deeper. Lyra was my factory setting, my default. My memories didn't begin with I, they began with we. We learned to walk by holding onto the same coffee table, our chubby toddler hands overlapping. We learned to read from the same worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, my finger tracing the words as she sounded them out. Our bedroom was a perfect mirrored sanctuary of lavender walls. My side was always a little messier, books stacked precariously on the nightstand. Her side was pristine, her volleyball trophies lined up in perfect, gleaming order. Between our beds was a single window that overlooked the sprawling arms of an old cherry blossom tree. In the spring, when the blossoms fell, it looked like it was snowing pink. That was our favorite time of year. We had a language that existed in the spaces between words. A slight raise of an eyebrow in a crowded school hallway meant, "Can you believe what she's wearing?" A subtle tap of a finger against her water bottle during a family dinner meant, "We'll talk about this later, after Dad's gone to bed." She was the only person on earth who knew my thoughts before I did. Sometimes I'd be struggling to find a word, my mouth opening and closing like a fish, and she'd whisper it from across the room without even looking up from her homework. It wasn't magic, it was just proximity. 17 years of sharing the same air, the same food, the same triumphs, the same heartaches. Volleyball was our cathedral. On the court, our secret language became a physical thing. I was the setter, she was the spiker. It was my job to put the ball exactly where she needed it to be, and it was her job to send it flying. We never had to call it. I could feel where she was going to be. I'd leap, my fingers meeting the ball, and in that split second, I'd see a flash of her, a blur of our navy and gold uniform, her arm cocked back, her eyes locked on the prize, and then the thunderous, satisfying smack of her palm connecting with the leather. It was a perfect, fluid motion. We were a single machine, designed for one purpose. Our coach, Mr. Henderson, used to just shake his head and laugh. "Can't coach that," he'd say. "That's something else entirely." That synergy was our life. But even the most perfect machines can be broken by an outside force. For us, that force was Coralie. My parents' divorce wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing decay. My dad, Marcus, had been a good father, a present father. He taught us how to ride bikes, how to skip stones, how to change a tire. My mother, Annalise, was our quiet center. She was an artist who came from a small town in Germany, and she filled our house with the smell of oil paints and fresh bread. She was gentle, thoughtful, and deeply in love with my father, which of course made his betrayal that much more devastating. Coralie was a paralegal at his firm. She was bright, loud, and wore dresses the color of jewels. Where my mother was soft watercolor, Coralie was sharp acrylic. Lyra and I nicknamed her the Hummingbird in those early days, because she was a constant blur of motion and noise, flitting around my dad, her laughter just a little too high, her touch lingering on his arm just a little too long. We saw it. My mom saw it. My dad, it seemed, was the only one who was blind. When the truth finally came out, it shattered my mother. It was like watching a beautiful porcelain vase crack in slow motion. She didn't yell or scream, she just withdrew. She became smaller, quieter, until one day she told us she was moving back to Germany to be with her family. She cried, we cried, she promised to call every day, and she did. But the 1,500-mile distance felt like a universe. My dad swore things would be better. He and Coralie moved into our house, and the hummingbird's vibrant, chaotic energy began to paint over the soft, quiet colors of the life we'd known. The smell of oil paint was replaced by scented candles that gave me a headache. The comfortable, lived-in clutter was replaced by stark, modern furniture that no one was allowed to put their feet on. Coralie tried in her way. She bought us things we didn't want. Designer jeans that weren't our style, concert tickets for bands we didn't like. They were offerings from a woman who didn't know the first thing about us and didn't seem interested in learning. "She's trying," my dad would say, a pleading look in his eyes. "She's performing," Lyra would whisper to me later that night from her bed across the room. "There's a difference." Lyra saw the carelessness in her long before I was willing to. Coralie was fundamentally self-absorbed. Her world revolved around her own needs, her own schedule, her own comfort. We, the daughters of the man she'd captured, were a logistical problem she had to manage. This wasn't a suspicion. It was a fact proven by a series of small, telling failures. I remember one night in July, a few months before everything changed. We'd gone to see a late movie with friends, and Coralie was supposed to pick us up at 10. At 10:15, we were still standing under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the theater entrance. At 10:30, Lyra was pacing. I called Coralie's phone. No answer. I called my dad, who was working late. He sounded annoyed, not at her, but at me for bothering him. Finally, at almost 11, her sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. She rolled down the window, a half-empty Starbucks cup in her hand, not even a hint of apology on her face. "Oh my God, you guys," she sighed, as if we were the inconvenience. The traffic was a nightmare. We got in the car. There had been no traffic. We'd seen the roads from the theater entrance. They were nearly empty. The lie was so lazy, so insulting. "We were worried," Lyra said, her voice tight. Coralie just laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Don't be so dramatic. You're fine." She took a sip of her drink and then, as she pulled away from the curb, she said the words that would later echo in my mind like a prophecy. "Honestly, you two would be lost without your dad. I can't keep track of your schedule on top of everything else." She couldn't keep track of us. We were an item on a to-do list that she frequently forgot to check. We weren't her children. We weren't even really her stepchildren. We were just a complication. A complication that, on a cool Tuesday night in September, she would decide to solve with negligence and a stop sign. That cool Tuesday night in September was the end of the world, but it started like any other game night. We won. It was a close match against the Northwood Panthers, our biggest rivals, and the winning point had been one of our classic, unspoken plays. I'd sent the ball soaring in a high, perfect arc, and Lyra, already in the air, had sent it rocketing to the floor. The gym had erupted. For a moment, we were queens, invincible in a kingdom of polished wood and echoing cheers. The high lasted until we were standing outside in the cooling air, the smell of cut grass mixing with the exhaust from the departing school buses. And we waited. 10 minutes, 20, an hour. Dad was out of town on a business trip, so pickup duty fell to Coralie. Lyra finally got her on the phone. We could hear her voice, thick with sleep and irritation, through the receiver. She'd forgotten. again. When her SUV finally pulled up, the apology was as absent as it had been that night at the movie theater. The second we slid onto the cold leather seats, the rant began. It wasn't a yell. It was a low, steady monologue of complaint, each word a perfectly polished stone of self-pity. "I finally get an hour to myself, a chance for a nap, and my phone is blowing up," she said, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The car smelled faintly of coconut air freshener and old coffee. "You have no idea how much I have to do. The house, the groceries, your brothers. It never ends. A nap isn't a luxury. It's a necessity." I glanced at Lyra in the dim light of the dashboard. She was staring out the passenger window, her jaw tight. She gave the slightest shake of her head, our silent language for "don't engage, it's not worth it." So I didn't. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and watched the familiar suburban houses blur past. The world was a string of warm, yellow squares in the darkness. Safe. Normal. "Are you even listening to me?" Coralie's voice sharpened. "Your father thinks you two are so self-sufficient, but you're not. You're still kids. Kids who need to be chauffeured around at all hours." I saw the intersection coming. The red octagon of the stop sign was clearly visible under the glow of a streetlight. It was a four-way stop we'd been through 1,000 times. But Coralie wasn't looking at the road signs. She was looking in the rearview mirror, her eyes trying to meet mine, trying to demand my attention, my validation for her manufactured hardship. "We appreciate you picking us up," Lyra said, her voice dangerously calm. It was her warning tone. "It's not about appreciation, it's about respect for my time," Coralie shot back, her head still turned, and then everything happened in a series of disconnected, slow-motion snapshots. Snapshot 1. The stop sign post sliding past my window. We weren't slowing down. Snapshot 2. Lyra's head whipping toward the driver's side, her eyes wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Snapshot 3. A blinding glare of headlights from the left, impossibly close. The world outside my window was filled with a massive, dark blue truck that seemed to materialize out of the night. Snapshot 4. The deafening, unholy sound of a horn and the scream of tires on asphalt. Snapshot 5. An impact so violent it felt like the world had been punched by God. My body was thrown forward, the seatbelt biting into my chest, my head hitting something hard. The sound was the worst part, a deep, gut-wrenching groan of metal being torn apart, followed by the crystalline, almost musical explosion of shattering glass. It was like 1,000 tiny bells ringing all at once. And then, silence. A ringing, humming, absolute silence. I tasted blood. My head was screaming in pain, and my entire right side felt like it was on fire. I tried to speak, to call Lyra's name, but my throat could only make a dry, rasping sound. I turned my head, a movement that sent a fresh wave of agony through me. The car was mangled, bent into a shape that wasn't a car anymore. Through the shattered windshield, I could see the blue truck, its front end accordioned. But my eyes were only searching for one thing. Lyra. She was slumped over in the passenger seat, unnaturally still. In the flashing red and blue lights that had begun to paint the scene, I could see a cut on her forehead, but that wasn't what scared me. It was the stillness. Lyra was never still, not even in sleep. There was always a twitch of a finger, the flutter of an eyelid. Now, there was nothing. The next part is a blur of voices, of hands pulling at me, of being strapped to a board. My last coherent memory from that intersection was of a paramedic shining a light in my eyes, his voice calm and distant. "We've got you," he said. All I could manage to whisper was her name. "Lyra?" He didn't answer. I woke up in a room that was too white and smelled too clean. A clock on the wall told me 2 days had passed. My arm was in a cast, my ribs were taped, and a dull, throbbing ache had taken up residence behind my eyes. But that wasn't the first thing I noticed. The first thing I noticed was the feeling of being alone. It was a cold, hollow space inside my chest, a phantom limb that was already aching for what it had lost. My dad was asleep in a chair by the window. His face looked 10 years older. etched with lines I'd never seen before. He woke when I stirred, his eyes red and swollen. He came to my bedside and took my hand. And then he told me. He didn't have to say much. The words were simple, clinical. There was too much internal bleeding, Alara. They did everything they could. He said other things, I'm sure. I saw his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him. The roaring silence from the crash was back, filling my head, my chest, my world. The physical pain from my injuries vanished, replaced by a pressure so immense I thought my bones would crack. It was the weight of a life that was supposed to be lived alongside mine, a future that had been erased. My other half, my mirror, my factory setting, was gone. And in that sterile white hospital room, I understood my first, undeniable truth. Coralie hadn't just run a stop sign. She had stolen a future. My future. The days and weeks that followed are a gray fog of grief. The funeral was a surreal performance. I sat in the front pew of the church, my arm in a sling, a silent observer at my own life's demolition. The air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and the sound of muffled sobbing. People I barely knew came up to me, their faces twisted in pity, and whispered meaningless platitudes. She's in a better place. Everything happens for a reason. Coralie was the star of the show. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, her face a perfect mask of sorrow. She accepted condolences with a trembling lip. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. She held my father's hand and looked, for all the world, like a woman shattered by tragedy. I watched her. I watched her check a notification on her phone behind a hymn book when she thought no one could see. I watched her whisper to her own mother about the catering at the wake. There was no grief in her eyes. There was inconvenience. There was annoyance. And deep, deep down, there was the chilling relief of a problem solved. My father was a ghost. He moved through the days in a stupor of guilt and loss, leaning on Coralie for everything. She arranged the funeral. She handled the paperwork. She fielded the calls. She became the gatekeeper of our family's grief, and in doing so, she began to curate it. The story, as she told it to concerned friends and family, was one of a tragic, unavoidable accident. It was just a freak thing, she'd say, her voice cracking on cue. The truck came out of nowhere. I never even saw it. She was lying. There were eyewitnesses. The police report, which I later found in my dad's study, clearly stated she had failed to stop, but no one challenged her. In the face of our family's tragedy, it seemed cruel to place blame. So she got away with it. And with every telling, the lie grew stronger, calcifying into our family's official history. When we got home, the house felt cavernous and wrong. The silence was an active presence, a weight in every room. The first thing I did, before I even went to my own bedroom, was go to hers. I pushed open the door to Lyra's room. It was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Her bed was perfectly made, a novel lying face down on her pillow. Her volleyball jersey was draped over the back of her desk chair. The air was still, holding her scent, a mix of her vanilla body wash and the laundry detergent my mom had always used. I walked in and shut the door behind me, and for the first time since I woke up in the hospital, I breathed. This was the only place left on Earth where she wasn't gone. It was a sanctuary, a time capsule. And in the months that followed, it became my life raft. I would finish my homework and slip inside, sitting on her bed, tracing the patterns on her comforter. I'd read her books, wear her sweaters, fall asleep with my face buried in her pillow, hoping to find her in my dreams. I was the keeper of this space, the high priestess of her memory, because I quickly realized no one else would be. The erasure campaign began subtly. A week after the funeral, a framed photo of me and Lyra on the mantelpiece, our arms around each other, grinning after a tournament win, was gone. In its place was a glossy, professional photo of my dad and Coralie from their wedding. When I asked about it, my voice trembling, Coralie waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, honey, I was just dusting. That frame was getting a bit old. We'll find a new one for it." We never did. Then came the bigger blows. 2 months later, we were at Walmart. My younger brothers, Silas and Owen, were running ahead, excited about an upcoming birthday. My dad and Coralie were pushing the cart when they struck up a conversation with an older man who worked there, someone my dad knew casually. They were making small talk, laughing about something. I was trailing behind, lost in my own world, when the man's words cut through the fog. "So, how many kids do you have now, Marcus?" he asked, smiling warmly. "4," my dad answered immediately, instinctively. "No, 3," Coralie corrected him, her voice light and cheerful but with an edge of steel. She patted my dad's arm. "You forget, honey. Just the 3 now." She smiled at the man, who just looked confused. My dad's face fell, a flicker of pain crossing his features before it was replaced by his now permanent expression of weary resignation. He didn't argue. I stopped dead in the aisle, right between the breakfast cereals and the granola bars. My blood went cold. No, 3. It was an amputation, a casual swipe of a blade cutting my sister out of our family, out of existence. I turned around without a word and walked back to the car, where I sat in the back seat, shaking, until they were done. That was the moment my grief changed. It was no longer a passive, heavy fog. It was a cold, hard stone in my gut. I realized I was living in a house with my sister's killer, and she wasn't just content with taking Lyra's life, she was determined to take her memory too. My silence, born of shock and pain, transformed. It became a shield. It became a weapon. If Coralie was going to erase her, then my purpose was to remember. I would become a living archive of my sister. I would watch. I would listen. And I would hold the truth in the quiet, fortified castle of my mind until the day came when it could no longer be contained. I didn't know when or how that day would come. I only knew that it would. And I would be ready. The year that followed was a masterclass in the art of being a ghost. I learned to move through the rooms of my own house without making a sound, to take up as little space as possible, to become an expert in the geography of avoidance. My life became a series of carefully plotted routes to evade my father and Coralie, a silent ballet of closed doors and unheard footsteps. I was present in body, but my soul had taken up permanent residence in the lavender-walled sanctuary of Lyra's room. That was the only place I wasn't a ghost. In there, surrounded by her things, I was half of a whole again. Everywhere else, I was just a haunting. Autumn bled into a cold, bleak winter. The first holiday season was an exercise in cruelty. Coralie, in a fit of what she must have thought was healing maternalism, went all out. She bought a monstrous Christmas tree that scraped the ceiling and filled the house with the aggressive artificial scent of cinnamon and pine from a dozen scented candles. She wanted to create a perfect, happy family portrait, a scene of domestic bliss to paper over the gaping wound at our table. My younger brothers, Silas and Owen, were caught up in the magic of it all, their childhood innocence a shield against the tension that was so thick I could taste it. They didn't understand why I wouldn't help decorate the tree, why I flinched when Coralie tried to put a Santa hat on my head. "Elara, please," my dad, Marcus, said one evening, his voice heavy with that now familiar tone of exhausted pleading. "It's Christmas. Just for a few hours, can we please just be a family?" "We're not a family," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Not a whole one." I saw Coralie, who was untangling a string of lights, stiffen. "And we're not because of her." My dad's face hardened. "That's enough. That is not fair, and it is not true." "It's the truest thing in the world," I replied, and walked out of the room. That night was the first time I called my mother Annalise in Germany and truly told her what was happening. Until then, our calls had been sad but superficial. I hadn't wanted to burden her. But that night, the dam broke. I sat on the floor of Lyra's closet, the phone pressed to my ear, and whispered everything. The Walmart incident, the missing photo, Coralie's performance of grief, my father's willful blindness. On the other end of the line there was no surprise, just a deep, knowing sadness. "Oh, my sweet girl," she said, her voice laced with the faint German accent that always felt like home. "I know what she is. I always have. She is a decorator. She finds a life she likes, and she moves in and redecorates it to her taste. Anything that doesn't match her new design, she puts it in storage, or she throws it away." Her words were a lifeline. Someone else saw it. I wasn't crazy. "She's trying to throw Lyra away, Mom," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Then you must not let her," Annalise said, her voice suddenly fierce. "You are the keeper of the flame now, Alara. It is a heavy burden for a child to bear, but you are strong enough. You have Lyra's strength in you too. Remember that. When you feel alone, you are not. You are fighting for two." Those Sunday night calls became my ritual, my 1 hour of sanity. We would talk about Lyra, sharing memories, laughing through our tears. My mom would tell me stories about when we were babies, details I'd forgotten. She was helping me build my archive, fortifying the walls of Lyra's memory against Coralie's siege. Winter finally gave way to a wet, tentative spring, and with it came the cherry blossoms. The old tree outside our window exploded in a riot of pale pink, just as it did every year. It was Lyra's favorite sight. We used to lie on our beds and watch the petals drift down, pretending it was snowing. One afternoon I was sitting on her window seat, watching the pink snow, when Coralie walked past the open door. She paused, then stepped into the room. It was the first time she had set foot in the sanctuary since the accident. I felt a cold wave of rage. "You know," she said, her voice casual, as if she were commenting on the weather, "we should really think about what to do with this room. It's a bit of a shrine, don't you think? It's not healthy to dwell." I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the tree. "I'm not dwelling," I said. "I'm remembering." "There's a difference," she said, walking further into the room. She ran a hand over Lyra's desk, her fingers leaving faint smudges in the thin layer of dust. "This is the past, Alara. You have to think about the future. Your father and I are." She smiled, a secretive, triumphant little smile. "We have some exciting news we'll be sharing with everyone soon." I knew then. I knew she was pregnant. It wasn't a shock. It was the next logical step in her redecoration project, a new child, a replacement, a way to finally, permanently, change the family's head count back to her preferred number. The official announcement came a few weeks later. My dad and Coralie sat Silas, Owen, and me down in the living room, the one with the furniture no one was allowed to relax on. Coralie was glowing. My dad looked relieved, as if this new life was a magic eraser for the one that had been stolen. The boys were ecstatic, jumping up and down, asking if it was a boy or a girl. To them, I was a ghost at the family meeting, a specter of grief they were hoping would just fade away. If only they knew how alive the rage was inside me. Coralie chattered on about her plans, about names and due dates, having no idea that while she was building a new future, I was spending every single night living in the past, in a room that held more truth and love than she would ever understand. We were living in 2 different houses under the same roof. Summer arrived, hot and suffocating. The heat seemed to make the tension in the house even more unbearable. Coralie's pregnancy became the sole focus of our household. Her doctor's appointments, her cravings, her complaints about her swollen ankles. It was the only news allowed. Any mention of the past, any flicker of sadness from me, was treated as a personal attack on her and her unborn child. "You need to be more positive, Alara," my dad said to me one evening after I'd skipped another family dinner. "Your negativity affects Coralie. It's not good for the baby." "Lyra's death wasn't good for me," I shot back. But no one seemed to care about my health. The conversations always ended there. He had no defense, so he would retreat, leaving me in the silence of my righteous anger. The year wore on. I went to school. I got good grades. I even went to volleyball practice, though every second in the gym was a fresh agony. Setting the ball for another spiker felt like a betrayal. The perfect, fluid motion was gone. The machine was broken. I was a limb moving without its counterpart, clumsy and useless. Coralie's belly grew, and with it, her audacity. She started talking about the future with a chilling certainty. She planned a family vacation for the next summer, once the baby is old enough to travel. She began ordering furniture online. I would see boxes from Pottery Barn Kids stacked by the front door. She was building a new life, brick by brick, right on top of my sister's grave. And through it all, I watched. I listened. I recorded every slight, every casual act of erasure, every lie. I was no longer just a grieving sister, I was a witness. My silence wasn't weakness anymore, it was a strategy. It was a long, slow inhalation. I was gathering all the air, all the evidence, all the pain, preparing for the moment I would finally be forced to exhale. That moment came on a Tuesday in late July, Coralie's birthday, the 364th day of my life without Lyra. My dad came to my door an hour before dinner. "Elara," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I need you to come downstairs tonight, for dinner. No arguments." "I eat in my room," I said flatly. "Not tonight." His voice was firm, but his eyes were begging. "It's Coralie's birthday. She's pregnant. It would mean a lot to me, to us. Please, just for one night, can you just try?" He didn't understand what he was asking. He wasn't asking me to come to dinner. He was asking me to sit at a table and celebrate the life of the woman who had ended my sister's. He was asking me to watch her blow out candles on a cake, a year older, a year she had stolen from Lyra. But I saw the desperation in his face, and a cold, quiet thought settled in my mind. Okay, I thought. Okay. One night. So I went downstairs. I took my place at the table, the empty chair beside me screaming its absence. I picked up my fork. A silent observer ready to watch the final act of the play. I had no idea I was about to walk onto the stage. Dinner began with a performance of civility so brittle it felt like it could shatter at any moment. Coralie was radiant, the undisputed queen of her birthday celebration, accepting praise for the pot roast she'd made. My dad, Marcus, played the part of the doting husband, laughing at her jokes, refilling her water glass. My brothers, Silas and Owen, were just happy to have a cake to look forward to, and I was the audience, a silent critic in the front row, my presence a heavy, unspoken accusation in the center of their carefully constructed play. I moved food around my plate, the silence in my head a roaring counterpoint to their cheerful chatter. Then, Coralie placed a hand on her stomach, a practiced, serene gesture, and looked around the table. "Well," she said, her voice brimming with theatrical excitement, "since it's my birthday, I thought it would be the perfect time to share some wonderful news with all of you." My dad beamed at her. This was clearly rehearsed. "We found out this morning," she continued, her eyes sparkling. "We're having a girl." Silas and Owen erupted in cheers. A sister. They started babbling about all the things they could teach her, their voices a high-pitched buzz of pure joy. Coralie drank in their excitement, her smile widening. "We can start decorating her nursery right away," she said, looking at my dad. "I have so many ideas." I felt a cold prickle of dread creep up my spine. I knew what was coming. "Which room will be the nursery?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign, rusty from disuse. The table went quiet. Coralie's smile didn't falter. She looked directly at me, her expression one of bright, unassailable confidence. "Well, Lyra's room, of course," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "It has the best morning light." She turned to my dad, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant for everyone to hear. In fact, I got a little bit of a head start this morning. I started boxing up some of the things in there and moving them to the attic. It felt good to finally clear out some of that energy. The fork in my hand clattered onto my plate. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Cleared out the energy. She said it like she was talking about smudging a room with sage, not dismantling the last physical piece of my sister's existence. "Why?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Why would you do that without asking me?" Coralie's cheerful mask flickered. A flash of annoyance crossed her face before she replaced it with a look of patient understanding, the kind one gives to a difficult child. "Honey, it's not a big deal. It's an empty room, and we need it for the baby. I didn't think I needed to ask your permission to manage my own household." "It's not an empty room," I said, and I could feel a tremor in my hands. "I go in there. I sleep in there sometimes. It's her room." "Was her room," Coralie corrected gently. She reached across the table and tried to pat my hand, but I pulled it away. "Elara, You need to accept that she's gone. This is a good thing. It's a new beginning for all of us." She leaned forward, her eyes shining with what she probably thought was profound wisdom. "Plus, you're getting a new sister who you can build an even stronger relationship with. You need to move on because nothing will bring Lyra back." And there it was. The final, unbearable blasphemy. Move on. Replace her. Build a stronger relationship. The roaring in my ears was so loud I could barely hear my own voice as I pushed my chair back from the table. "I'm not hungry." "Alara, sit down," my dad commanded, his voice sharp. "You are being dramatic. It's Coralie's birthday." I ignored him and turned to walk away. I could feel their eyes on my back. I almost made it out of the room, but then Coralie's voice, dripping with faux confusion, floated across the dining room. "I don't understand what her problem is," she said to my dad, loud enough for me to hear perfectly. "She couldn't even bother to be happy about my pregnancy, but she's angry about me moving things out of an unoccupied bedroom." I stopped. My back was still to them, but I was frozen in the doorway. Unoccupied. The word echoed in the screaming silence of my mind. It was the Walmart incident all over again, but 1,000 times worse. An erasure not just of a number, but of a soul. Slowly, I turned around. I looked at Coralie, truly looked at her, for the first time in a year. I saw the petulant set of her mouth, the self-satisfied glow in her eyes, and the dam of my silence, a structure I had painstakingly built for 364 days, did not just break. It detonated. "My problem?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "You want to know what my problem is? My problem is that every major traumatic event of my life has your name on it. My problem is that you knowingly started sleeping with a married man, a man with a wife and 2 daughters who adored him, and you didn't care. You broke my family. You sent my mother into a depression so deep she had to leave the country just to breathe again." My dad stood up. "Alara, that is enough." "No, it's not," I said, my eyes never leaving Coralie's. Her face had gone pale. "My problem is that a year ago, you were so preoccupied with ranting about how we disturbed your precious nap that you drove through a stop sign. You killed my sister Coralie. You were distracted, and she died. I was in the hospital for weeks, but she died. Because of you." I took a step closer to the table. "So no, I am not angry about your new baby. I am angry that you dare to walk into her room, the only place I have left of her, and you touch her things. That you box up her life and call it clearing out energy without so much as a word to me. And I am angry that you have the audacity, the absolute cruelty, to stand there and tell me to move on from the death that you caused." She found her voice then, a high, reedy sound. "The accident happened. You are living in the past. Everything happens for a reason. God works in mysterious ways." The empty platitudes were like gasoline on a fire. "Don't you dare," I hissed. "Don't you dare hide behind God. Tell me, do you honestly believe that my sister's death was unavoidable?" "It was just unlucky fate," she stammered. "Unlucky fate?" I took another step. "She would be alive right now if you had been looking at the road instead of yelling at us in the rearview mirror." Her face crumpled, and she looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of being caught. "You make me feel like I wanted her to die instead," she whispered. I just stared at her, the cold, hard stone of truth lodged in my throat. "Is that it?" she pressed, her voice rising. "Is that what you think? You wish it had been me, don't you? Just say it." I turned to walk away, the rage suddenly spent, leaving me hollow and shaking. But she lunged from her chair and grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "You want me dead, don't you?" she shrieked, her face inches from mine. I stayed silent. "Don't you?" she repeated, shaking my arm. "Answer me. You wish I had died in that car, not her." And in that moment, looking into the eyes of the woman who had systematically dismantled my world, the truth came out. It wasn't a yell. It was a quiet, exhausted and honest confession. "My life would have been easier that way," I said. She let go of my arm as if she'd been burned. A sob tore from her throat. My dad rushed to her side, wrapping his arms around her as she cried. He looked at me over her shoulder, his face a mask of fury and disgust. "You're heartless," he spat. A few minutes later, after the storm inside me had passed, a wave of something, not guilt, but maybe regret for the pain of the words themselves, washed over me. I walked back to the dining room doorway. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I shouldn't have said it like that." My dad snapped his head up, his eyes blazing. "Just get out," he said, his voice a low growl. "Leave her alone." I did. I went upstairs, not to my room, but to hers. I closed the door on the sound of Coralie's fake sobs and my father's misplaced comfort, and I was finally, truly, alone. The 6 months that followed the birthday dinner were lived in a state of Arctic cold. The confrontation hadn't cleared the air. It had frozen it solid. My home was no longer a home. It was a territory of hostile neutrality, a silent, bitter landscape where we were all just trying to survive. Coralie and I existed in different dimensions. If I entered a room, she would immediately find a reason to leave it. We never spoke. We never made eye contact. I was a ghost to her, and she was a ghost to me. The new baby, a girl they named Aubrey, arrived in late December. Coralie got her wish. The room with the best morning light, the room that had been Lyra's, was now a nursery painted a cheerful, soulless shade of yellow. I learned to walk past its closed door without looking, to block out the sound of the baby crying. It was another station of my grief, a landmark of loss I had to navigate every single day. My relationship with my father was a ruin. We communicated only when absolutely necessary, through clipped, functional text messages or notes left on the kitchen counter. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chasm of resentment and misunderstanding. He had chosen his side. He had chosen the decorator over the wreckage she had caused. But the explosion at the dinner table had changed something profound in me. The year of silence had been a year of stagnation, of being trapped in the amber of my grief. By finally speaking the truth, I had cracked the amber. I wasn't free yet, but I could move. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had to get out. My justice wasn't going to be found in winning an argument or making them see the truth. My justice was going to be my escape. My Sunday night calls with Annalise became strategy sessions. My mother, who had been forced out of her own life, was now my accomplice in planning my exodus. She sent me brochures for universities in Munich and Berlin. We spent hours on video calls, her face on my laptop screen a warm, encouraging beacon as she helped me navigate the complex world of international college applications. For the first time in a year, I had a future, a tangible goal, a direction. Forward. The night before Coralie went into labor, I did something I had known I would have to do. I waited until the house was dark and silent, and I slipped into Lyra's room for the last time. Coralie, in her nesting phase, had packed most of Lyra's things into cardboard boxes, labeled with her neat looping script, Lyra, clothes, Lyra, books. They were stacked in a corner, waiting to be banished to the attic. I didn't take much. I couldn't. I just took the soul of the room. I took the worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit from the box of books. I took her first volleyball medal from a dusty case. I took a small carved wooden box where she kept letters we'd passed in class and a single perfectly preserved cherry blossom petal from the spring before she died. I packed these treasures into a shoebox and hid it in the bottom of my own closet. This was my victory. Coralie could have the room, the furniture, the paint. I had saved the memories. I had kept the flame. One afternoon in March, I saw Coralie through the living room window, rocking Aubrey on the porch swing. She was humming a lullaby, her face soft in a way I'd never seen it. She looked up and our eyes met for a brief second. There was no anger, no hatred. There was just nothing. We were two strangers living on opposite sides of a tragedy. She had her new life, her redecorated family, and I had my escape plan. I realized then that true revenge wasn't about making her suffer. She was already living her own sentence, trapped in a house haunted by a ghost she refused to see, with a husband who had chosen convenience over his own child's memory. The best revenge, the only revenge that mattered, was becoming the person I was meant to be, a person she could never touch again. It was about carrying Lyra's light out of that dark, broken house and into a future of my own making. Today, I am 18 years old. I'm not sitting in my childhood bedroom or in the silent, haunted house I grew up in. I'm sitting in a small cafe in Munich, a cup of steaming tea warming my hands, watching people chatter in a language I am slowly learning to call my own. The acceptance letter from the university here didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a key to a door I thought I'd never be able to open. It felt like a future. A year ago, I was a ghost. I was a silent keeper of a flame in a house determined to extinguish it. I thought my story was over, that it had died in a mangled car on a dark September night. But I was wrong. It was just the end of the first volume. Coralie taught me a lesson I never wanted to learn, that some people are decorators of lives, not builders. They see a space and want to change it to fit their aesthetic. And anything that doesn't match the new decor gets thrown out. She tried to throw Lyra out. She tried to throw our history, our bond, our love out with the old furniture. What she never understood is that Lyra wasn't furniture. She is the foundation of the house. She is in the walls, the floorboards, the very air I breathe. My father taught me another painful lesson, that inaction is a choice. That silence in the face of injustice is a betrayal. I love him. And a part of me will always be that little girl who thought he was the strongest man in the world. But I see him clearly now. I see a man who chose the quiet of a lie over the storm of the truth. I hope one day he finds the courage to forgive himself, not for my sake, but for his. The rage I felt that night at the dinner table, it saved me. It was a year of grief and pain compressed into a single white-hot diamond of truth. It cut me free. But I didn't bring it with me to Germany. I left it there, in that house, where it belongs. What I brought with me was Lyra. I carry her in the way I now speak up for myself. I carry her in the way I appreciate the morning light on a cobblestone street. I carry her in the small, carved wooden box that sits on my new desk. A constant, quiet reminder of the unbreakable bond that not even death could sever. Coralie didn't want me to move on. She wanted me to forget. But I've learned the difference between moving on and moving forward. Moving on is erasure. It's pretending the past didn't happen. Moving forward is carrying the past with you, letting it shape you, letting it strengthen you as you walk into the future. My life is not easier, the way I thought it would be. The hole she left in the world is still there, but my life is my own now. And in a strange way, Lyra's life is too, because I am living for both of us. The person I am becoming, a woman who is brave, who is honest, who is free, is worth more than anything Coralie took from me. If you are going through your own darkness, if you are sitting in a silence that feels like it will last forever, remember this. Your voice is still there. Your truth matters. Justice isn't always a courtroom or a grand confrontation. Sometimes justice is packing a suitcase. Sometimes it's buying a plane ticket. And sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be, on your own terms, and carrying the ones you love with you, not as ghosts of the past, but as the guiding stars of your future. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.